So how do you become incredibly good? I mean, I've heard that before, be good at something, but can you lay out step 1, 2, 3 for me to say, okay, do this, then do this, and do this, and this is a time frame, and if you keep at it, you will get your first job?
Yeah. So I guess the way that I look at it is just to step back and then narrow it down a little bit into the actual practical, is it's all about contact with what you're working on. So in other words, what I mean by that is you want to spend more and more time with the actual code. So the big principle is if you spend a little bit of time every single day with the code, whether that is JavaScript, Python, or Ruby, eventually, even if it feels really hard and you don't remember anything at the beginning, it will eventually sink in. And in the same way that human languages will eventually sink in if you approach them in the same manner. So it's really, the goal is to start with very easy things and gradually work your way up. So the ultimate goal is to have continuous contact with any given language, whatever it might be, or technology, and to increase the complexity of that over time. But start really, really simple, because I think the harder thing for people actually is motivation. And the fact that the goal should be to do a little bit every single day. And if you can do that little bit every single day, 30 minutes, an hour at least, it's just inevitable that you're going to learn it. It might take months, but you're going to learn it. And then little by little, you'll start increasing the complexity. And in some sense, I think if you have the motivation, that happens naturally. So I think you want to start very simple and not be afraid to stay simple. I think it's very, personally, when I'm learning things, I know it's always a struggle to want to dive into the really, really advanced stuff really, really early. And I think there's a couple of problems with that. One, you don't understand it yet. So there's a huge amount of waste that goes into the learning process there. And it's discouraging because you don't understand it. And fundamentally, you're just not really learning as much because it's over your head. You can't grasp the concepts yet. And so I found myself, when I really go back to the basics and really gently and gradually build up, ultimately I end up learning things even faster because, one, my motivation stays high, and second, I think it's just a much more natural way to allow the mind to process what you're learning. So that's sort of like high-level concept. And I think down to the practical level, I would say the key is starting with, at the moment, I would suggest people start with a screencast. So I've got a couple of favorite sites. Pluralsight is one. Safari Books Online is one. And then depending on the language, for example, if you're going into Ruby, there is something like Michael Hartle's Ruby on Rails tutorial, which will give you an incredible introduction to both Ruby and the Ruby on Rails.
And so what you're saying is that you can learn different programming languages. You can go to screencasts. You can perhaps listen to podcasts. You can read blog posts from people who are putting out, good content and for you to consume and to learn. Some books. There's a combination that you can have and you can learn. But the question is, how long does that go on? What do you think? Do they need to do it for a year, 2 years, 6 months, 3 months? How do I get my first job?
That's a good question. I think it's hard to say. It's though I would venture to say it's probably earlier than most people think. Honestly, I think we expect going in that you have to become a genius in order to get a job as a programmer, and that's simply not true. I'm definitely not a genius, and I have met already many, many different people that have started with no background in mathematics, no background, just either business degrees, history degrees, English degrees. In fact, I've was talking with a VP of engineering out at a company in San Francisco that's doing really quite well at the moment. And he made this really interesting comment that he's found a very interesting correlation between people with English degrees and ability to program and debug code really, really well. So I'm not sure exactly what that's about, but it's an interesting comment. And so I would say, I think it depends, but it's probably earlier than people expect, because I think most people going in expect it to be like you need to know everything before you can get a job. And that's just simply not, like, you're going to learn, first of all, every single one of us, like, we spend a large part of our day probably researching, well, hitting a bug and then trying to figure out how to fix it. And we spend a lot of time researching and trying to figure out, like, what have other people done? It's not as though you have to be at a level where, you know, you can, by memory, fix every single bug that potentially any human could ever write. I mean, that's just not reality anymore, right? We've got Stack Overflow and all these other things.
So if I can condense it into one sentence, I think what you're saying is that it is a constant process of learning, and you don't have to wait until you're at a certain stage in your learning to apply for jobs. You can apply from very early on, maybe, a couple of months of study. Just start applying and see if somebody wants to take a chance on you. In that case, if you don't have a lot of experience, if you have something to show, you had done some work that you can show them, you probably can get an entry level